This is a special edition of the Double G Show here with my special guest, BJ Bethel. BJ, what's going on?
Not much, and thanks for having me. And I wouldn't call myself that special of a guest, but thanks for the thanks for the kind introduction, Garrett.
Well, so
Appreciate it.
here's the thing. I have had this idea on doing a show, a more serious show based on issues in wrestling, based on topics in wrestling that don't really have to do with fandom or in ring or whether or not you enjoy what you're watching on your television, and more kind of just inside stuff about wrestling. And so the old television show, the ESPN show on Sunday, The Sports Reporters, was kind of like the idea. I have a journalism background. I've never been a reporter. I kind of got out of radio very early on. But the way that I like to discuss wrestling is with a journalistic slant on it. And I was just kind of wondering if, who's out there who would want to do something like this. And, obviously you have a reporting background as your livelihood. And so I thought, oh, maybe BJ would be interested in this kind of idea. So here we are. Now we'll do the sports reporter gimmick in a second here. We're going to take a few topics and kind of dig into them. The idea of the sports reporters is stolen by me. Is people watching on video can see the background that I'm using. But also the idea of this segment or this special edition show is the Wrestling Repotters. Now, where I stole that from is Bill Simmons would bring on Jason. Gosh, there's a New York Times writer. Is his name Jason Day? Jason Gay, maybe? But he's a
Jason.
sports writer from the New York Times, and then his own writer and podcaster, Brian Curtis, who covers media and politics for them. And they kind of did the wrestling or the sports reporters, but they called it the sports repotters because they're podcasting. And so I just stole both of those gimmicks for this special show. So I'm not even pretending that it's creative in any way. It is just straight up and outright gimmick infringement. Before we get to our topics, we both came up with a couple that we want to talk about. I have a question for you about your reporting of the AEW media rights deal, because I think what's interesting about this is we have a lot of people close to AEW who will not go on record or who have not yet gone on record to say that the deal is done. And you did use the deal is done in principle. We've heard a
Well,
lot.
yeah, in principle, it's different than the deal's done, but yes, it's in principle. There's been something agreed to in principle for at least a few weeks, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so Sean Ross Sapp, Dave Meltzer, Wade Keller, none of those, they've all insinuated that they believe it's close. They believe that, that it probably will happen. But you were the only one, as far as I could tell, that went even as far as it being done in principle. Now, I don't even really want to talk about sources or anything. That's your business. That's your, again, your livelihood. But the question I had for you is the way that you posted this information, the way that you broadcasted your report is through Twitter. And as we know, Twitter is one of the worst platforms that all of us still use because it is where all the people are. And I can imagine that you, not being one of those three individuals that I mentioned, probably caught a lot of flack for having the audacity to actually have information and talk about the information that you had. How did you deal with that nonsense?
I mean, I've reported on to get talk about this. I had a couple sources who I talked to on this, and what they gave me was information I talked about to them about, and it was pretty solid. And I felt it was strong enough to go on background, and that's why I posted it on Twitter. I just happens to be the app that I'm on with the most followers, and I mean, if people are following me, it's generally because of politics, opioids, and some Russian information, disinformation reporting I did like 10 years ago. Maybe some sports, I mean, it's through my reporting, wrestling, me talking about that. But it seemed like the logical place. I also write for SE Scoops, and I didn't feel comfortable posting it on there because I didn't want them to take a blast when I didn't have it. I'm still of the mind I would prefer to have somebody officially tell me something before it's done, but that's just not how reporting's done in wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of it's on background, but I had enough background sources on this that I felt it was good enough that I could put it out on social media, which was that they had an agreement in principle. It was pretty much put to paper at that point. But as far as the people reacting go and all that, yeah, I'd like to say, after, it looks like they're probably going to announce something on Dynamite this Wednesday. At least I think that's what I saw, a graphic. Maybe it was an old one. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's hard.
Tony is very happy right now. If you followed him on Twitter, he's
Yes.
very excited. Things are in line. The stars have aligned for him as far as his tweets are concerned. So I don't know if if he's gonna talk about it this week or if he's gonna wait till All In. But he is particularly happy, and he's talked about this this Paris meeting with David Zaslav and all that. So he's very positive about prospects right now.
Yeah, the thing with me is I've reported on a lot more serious issues than somebody's TV deal. It's like I've reported on it's no big deal to me. If yeah, it's annoying. Yeah, I hate it when people tell me I'm an idiot. It's like, look at my bio. I've got some decent bylines. I'm not saying I'm the world's greatest reporter, but I'm a pretty good one. I covered federal courts, I've covered state courts, I've covered the opioid crisis, way early, and was a lot of it was reported elsewhere, and I was I did that for some. I've been my art my work's been printed in the major English speaking capitals in Australia, Washington D.C. with the Washington Post, Australia the Sydney Morning Herald, and the Guardian in London. So I think I have a pretty good track record with what I'm doing, and I've gotten some. When I report on like real life news, I've taken a lot of heat for things that's happened there. You talk about serious pressure, and you're talking about life changing things that can happen. Which is one reason. What's hilarious is that's one reason I wanted to write about wrestling again, is because I wanted something that was a little bit more fun and relaxing to do. I actually approached Dave Meltzer about it a couple of years ago before I ended up with SE Scoops, and then and now then this the Janel Grant thing happened, um, to me it's just not a big deal. It's like it's annoying. Yeah, when it turns out that yeah they're getting a great deal, yeah it's going to be for a lot more money than maybe the anti AEW people, which I don't understand why you would be anti AEW, but it's going to be more than what they would probably expected them to get. It's going to set them up pretty well for the future. And yeah, I could tell them all to, kiss my rear end, but I'd love to say that, parts of me would, but at the same time, this is normally just part of my job. I got something good. I got some decent information. I decided to put it out. And I think pretty much Sean Ross Sapp and what Dave Meltzer and Wade Keller have all said, we've all been kind of close in what our reporting is, just to varying lengths.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard some money figures. I'm not going to go into those into detail. Um, they seem to be getting better every time I talk to somebody. I don't know what that means, but it definitely this is going to set them up well. But as far as a reporting standpoint, I just did my job. This is what I do. This is it's kind of a calling, and if some idiots on Twitter don't like it, you just kind of have to float through it and deal with it. And I think this is where an advantage where like guys like you and me and Dave, Wade Keller, and going back to people that reported it, the early days of wrestling where you just got blasted with hate because at the time, you had this huge wrestling media internet thing come out right when the Monday Night Wars happened, and this huge presence, and it was just the zoo, and you gain really a tough skin. I had death threats because of stuff I wrote about Raw or Nitro, back in the day. So this was kind of light, but at the same time, it's really annoying. It's kind of like it's still like, okay, why are you online doing this with your life? It's like there's got to be something better you can do. It's like I'm at least on here trying to inform people or trying to have a fun conversation. It's like why you're on here doing what you're doing. I guess this is a psychological phenomenon. Maybe they'll figure out in 100 years. I don't know.
We're going to talk about the Janel Grant and Vince McMahon situation here, and it made me think of something, which is the pro wrestling community or the media. To me, is very much a either podcast or aggregation media.
Yes.
There are very few actual reporters who are doing this, like a job. It's a very passionate hobby influenced media. So, and I'm included in that. I have a day job. I am not actively reporting on Vince McMahon. I am not reaching out to people to get quotes about things that are going on. I am discussing the content as it happens, or the information as it happens, and aggregators are taking things and posting it on their websites. That's really what the media is for pro wrestling, for the majority of it. And then you have Sean and Dave. I'm not sure exactly how much reporting Wade is doing, but Wade has sources going back so many years because of how young he was when he got into this business.
Yeah,
And there
mid to late 80s. Yeah, with
and
Wade.
there are,
Jason Powell is another good
yeah,
one.
there are others who, people may not hear about a lot, but who have been doing this for a long time and who have sources. But again, the majority is like aggregation and podcast discussion, and you can sort of tell by who is paying close attention to the Vince McMahon, Janelle Grant stuff. When you're covering this case, or the beginnings, the origin of this, obviously those pieces that had come out, uh, you know, a year ago, or even more, were very eye opening at that time. It was like, oh my God, I cannot believe this is what was going on. However, if you had a little bit of background on the history of Vince McMahon, it wasn't that surprising. I think it was surprising that it was still happening, but the
Yeah.
idea that this is what Vince was doing behind the scenes running a company, I don't think was that surprising to people who knew. And I just remember when the Cosby thing happened, I went up to Dave and I go, how does Vince not get caught up in this? And he goes, well, Vince has everybody sign an NDA. That's how he gets away with doing what he does. And I was like, wow, like somebody is going to talk. Like there's going to be something that happens here. And it did. Those pieces came out, I think in the Wall Street Journal. And then this lawsuit happened, and now we know who Janelle Grant is. And is there anything that you've seen, that you've read, that you've learned in your reporting that makes you believe that this is actually going to go to trial? Are we, or is TKO, which they seem to be want to do with this UFC thing, are they just going to settle? Like, where do you stand with what you believe is going to happen at this point?
I think I mean, it's just my opinion. I don't have any insight on this, but I just other than what I've reported on. But as you were saying, you were talking with Dave about this, and it's like he's heard stories about this going back, and that's something that happened with me when I started covering developmental, which was in Cincinnati and Louisville. I was talking to some women and just other men about some of the things that were happening in the company on the main roster, and certain things you're expected to do to help your career, and that was something I remembered pretty well. And it's one of the reasons why I just got tired of covering wrestling at that point. Later on, when the initial Janelle Grant shareholder suit happened, um, I wasn't surprised at all. I was kind of surprised it had taken this long. I think that's kind of what with Vince, and what Dave said about Vince. I believe that's kind of how he felt about it. But at the same time, it's like he had a really good lockdown thing where it's like, okay, if you want to get a paycheck in this business, you can't tick off Vince.
Mm-hmm.
That's a road you can't go down. And then there's the non-disclosure agreements. But when the initial shareholder suit happened, I went back and I started looking through a lot of my old notes, and I put together a spreadsheet of just women that I'd known that there had been talk that maybe they'd been victims of things that happened in WWE. And I started putting something together back then, just to kind of shore up in case this went further. I think I will say this. right now, the stuff that I read in the complaint that Janel Grant filed was nothing like I believe was actually happening. I was horrified. This was nothing like I thought. I thought maybe this was just coworker to coworker stuff. What I read in the Janelle Grant complaint was just mind blowing. Um, and that was really kind of the big shock to me, was just how horrific this might have been. Obviously, he's under a grand jury investigation right now. That's been happening for a year. In fact, usually they sit for a year, or they get an extension up to 18 months. So they could come out at any time with an indictment. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't get indicted, just because this is a very, very tough district to deal with. This is a Southern District in New York. They just got Trump for 34 felony counts. They Sam Bankman-Fried, they convicted. Sam Menendez, a U.S. senator, they got him. They don't go after you unless they got you.
Mm-hmm.
I would be stunned if they don't indict Vince McMahon, just because of their track record. They're going after Sean Combs now.
Oh
Um,
my gosh, that's
and
another crazy story that's very similar to this one, by the way.
yes, that's another one. And that seems to be something else. Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know if those are the exact court, but I know that's kind of the kind of cases this group deals with. Sarah, I can't remember her name. She's the assistant U.S. District Attorney, and she's been filing most of the sealed documents, and she's the one that requested to stay officially with the federal court on the Grant civil suit. And she said that, I mean, well, she hasn't said this, but I'm just looking into her background. She specifically specializes in sex trafficking cases. That's not her only thing. She does a lot of other kinds of work, with the FBI as far as investigating. And boy, she's not the FBI; she's with the Department of Justice. But she's just that's what her work is sex trafficking cases. So I'll be very stunned if they don't get an indictment on Vince. It's also easy to get an indictment. That's something else that other people need to understand. Is like there's always been the saying, and JD Oliva said this too, is that, and this is something that's going back 30, 40 years, is that you can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. That's just the way the process is set up. So, but at the same time, I don't think they would be going after him at all. I don't think they would be going after him at all if they didn't have something that they could probably get guilty on, at least in their mind.
And I don't mean to say that I'm sort of numb to this kind of abuse that was rumored to have happened, but this is the same guy, and if this story is exactly what happened, who basically set Rita Chatterton up to sexually assault her and then
Yes.
fire her after the fact. So that type of behavior that goes back to, the mid 80s, I think that's very similar through line to what we heard in the Janelle Grant case. So
That's a very good point you brought up, because working these kinds of cases as a reporter, I'm going into analyst mode right now, or I'm going into kind of this mode right now, where I'm looking at things and like how a court or a police, a detective would look at this, and you see patterns. And with Vince, starting back in '86, was where either chattered, and coming back to other women that had come out. You get to the 2006 Boca Raton tanning salon incident.
yep.
These all fit a pattern. Missy Hyatt came out a couple months ago on a podcast and said she talked with Janelle Grant's team, and she said Vince once tried to,
Get back to her room. Yeah.
yeah, basically he was kind of really being almost kind of forceful, I guess is maybe how you can put it. But his
Also,
behavior in all these instances, they
the other part
fit the
about that
pattern.
is she believes, at least based on my reading of that her turning him down affected her employment there.
Yes, and that is something that's going to hit this case like the Titanic hitting the iceberg, because you get into this, and let's say he gets found guilty. You go in and they wipe out in the NDAs in the civil suit, because in criminal court NDAs don't matter. And I think from what I've heard, a lot of Vince's NDAs are on shaky ground anyway. Um, just because of how, I don't think it was anything to do with his legal team. I think it was just how he dealt with them personally. But you're going to get into cases where it's okay. You had women that, maybe they're forced to do sexual favors for positioning into these, to get positioning, get pushes. Well, then you also have women who either didn't get propositioned or turned them down and said no, and their pushes got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So they're also subject to due damages in civil court. This is also something that's becoming closer to a crime. A lot of the things that are used to be handled kind of as sexual harassment, kind of or just kind of like a HR incident, they're being looked more and more by criminal courts as crimes, such as when somebody who's your boss is putting pressure on you to have sex with them to keep your job, which is what the heart and soul of the Vince case is. And that turning that change of mind in the courts over the last several years, that's really, this could really blow big. You talk about the number of women employees, the number of women's wrestlers that's been through there. You talk about, I mean, Vince isn't the only one in WWE who's been accused of this kind of behavior. Um, it could be huge. I mean, it depends on what they come out and who they decide to indict. If they decide to follow up and indict anybody else, if they decide to pursue criminal charges against the company, if there's anything RICO involved, that could happen. But these are coulda, shoulda, wouldas. It doesn't really get down to what may happen, which is or what will happen. We don't know that until the court finally comes out and they rule what the grand jury finds. Sorry, that was very long, but it's hard to explain this stuff unless you.
Oh, I have found the Vince side, whenever they come out with commentary, I find their commentary to be uh less based on information and more based on passion or influential stuff. And to me, that is the opposite of what I think is actually good strategy. Um, I just don't. It doesn't sound like there's a great strategy there to try and tell us that she is actually the evil one and not him. Like that in of itself is going to be very hard for to get that message to me. Me knowing what I know about Vince, it just sounds like the strategies that I've heard from that side have just been not fantastic. What is your read on how they are handling some of the media stuff?
I think Vince is having a lot to do with how they're pushing stuff out. I think he's probably influencing a lot of it. Two, a lot of their motions they're filing are very hyperbolic.
Yes.
They're very, I mean, they're really trying to slime Janel Grant as this crazy ex-girlfriend. A court's got to determine all this. And three, I've always found it that, in most cases when you're not arguing the facts and you're arguing passion, and I'll give one good example of this. It's, Vince's legal team now. It's when they were representing MLW and their suit against WWE. WWE's filing was just very passionate and hyperbolic, and then it also got destroyed. MLW won handedly in that case. And to me, I just would think what surprises me the most is why they're not arguing the things that have been laid bare in the complaint. There's a lot of information in there that they could take, say, hey, we have evidence that says this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen. I mean, they're essentially not even denying most of what happened in the complaint. That's been surprising to me. They're just kind of twisting what was going on with it or what her attitude was toward it. And to me, that's distressing because it's just like, okay, this awful stuff did happen.
So this is going to help us transition to the next thing that we're going to talk about. But I am of the opinion, and I haven't heard many people say this, so it's not like I'm, taking someone else's thoughts and running with them. This is what I've been thinking is whenever I hear Triple H talk about anything serious, it is so hard for him to discuss any of this stuff that is kind of important for his job as a high-level executive in this company, he comes off as a junior varsity lightweight when it comes to discussion about anything serious. So, for instance, the other day, there was this discussion about Brock Lesnar. When is Brock coming back? And Triple H's answer was something to the effect of, well, Brock will come back when he wants to come back. Now, anybody with any sort of knowledge about why Brock is gone knows that that's immediately bullshit.
Yes.
He is gone because he is not named in that lawsuit, but he wasn't named in the anonymous things that came out, but we do know that he is in that lawsuit. And that's why he is gone.
Yeah.
Triple H is the face of the company to the public. Everybody knows who's close to it knows Nick Khan. And I kind of wonder, because Nick Khan has been in such high places with high level executives, I kind of wonder if he thinks Triple H is one of the weaker spots when it comes to the media aspect of how they're covered, because Triple H is great. He's doing a really good job in the creative. And some people want to say he's, A+, whatever. I think he's doing a solid B+ job with the WWE creative. He's not done anything to take them off of their hot period. He's had to handle giant egos like The Rock coming in. All of those things, that's great management on his end.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, when he answers questions, he comes off as so unprepared. And I wonder if that's when you want to take WWE and TKO to the next level, I wonder if they think that kind of holds them back a little bit.
I believe it does. And I think that I've said this before and I'll say it again. I think when this is all said and done, I don't think Triple H will be with TKO. I don't believe that, I think Nick Khan will probably end up leaving, going somewhere else. Uh, but I think you're right. He just comes off woefully unprepared. But this is somebody who's lived in the wrestling business their entire life. And they've also lived as a McMahon for the last 20 plus years. And it's the insular attitude, especially within wrestling media, like, oh, Vince will beat this. Oh, this isn't this big of a deal. You listen to some people comment on this Grant case, like Kevin Nash, and you're just like, okay, you can tell they haven't been in the real world. It's like, I've been in the real world. I've been in these federal courts, man. It's serious business. And there's a few people there kind of get it, and there's others that there's still people there who think Vince is just going to come walking in the door one day and be running everything again. And Triple H is kind of emphatic of that, or not emphatic, it's the wrong word, but just kind of symbolic of that, where he's kind of just, I don't think he really understands the seriousness of this, like, why have Stephanie come back and be on TV the other day? I mean, was that because Shane McMahon met with Tony Khan? Like, I'm pretty much that's exactly what I'm thinking, is that I'm like, I mean, the only reason for her to be there was because Shane showed up at AEW, at least in the office for a photo. Also,
Supposedly, it was a leaked photo. It was not planned to
yeah,
come out,
I like
according to
Tony did a
sources.
great, the old tabloid, caught in a hotel room shot of Tony there with a,
Yeah.
and then Shane just looking over like, who's this person? Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I'm not the only one to say this, and and it's like Brian Alvarez was the one who said this and was just great about it. It was just like, there's absolutely nothing that gets leaked out of there. He goes, people can figure out match finishes just by following the booking or just guessing it. And I guess Tony, according to Brian, he would know this a lot more than me. He just is like, Tony gets obsessed about leaks. And that's one reason I think he keeps so much of this around himself as far as running things. But it's like, yeah, that didn't get out unless he wanted it to get out.
Yeah.
And
No,
then you have
absolutely.
later in the day, you have, it was brilliant. It was brilliant work on their part. I mean, you're pushing, okay, right before SummerSlam, guess what? Shane McMahon's in the AEW offices. Wow. It was great
Information
little,
gets out on a Wednesday morning, the night of their TV show.
oh yeah, just, right when you might think, oh, Shane McMahon going to be on Dynamite tonight. Um, and then, later in the evening, Shane releases a statement. Oh, we had a great talk. We have many things in common. It's funny to watch. It was a great moment, but it's just trying to combat with that with Stephanie. And then, I was really disappointed nobody at this press conference asked him about Shane. It's like, how do you not ask about Shane? It's like, okay, I can see being uncomfortable and not wanting to ask about Grant if you're like a newer reporter, you haven't done this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you not ask about Shane, your brother-in-law? He's meeting with the enemy. He's meeting with Tony Khan. This is the guy you worked with all these years.
And
You
not
ran
only
a
did you
company.
work with him, but you are in the spot that he thought he was going to be in.
That's the big thing, is that Shane, if all's said and told, then you go back and repeat all this all over, and it goes according to the way people thought, Shane would be the guy running the company right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you right now, there's a lot of people wish he was. um, Not because, just because of how things have turned out with certain, like with the Vince scandal, but it's like, how do you not ask? How do you not ask? That's just another thing. It's like so infuriating watching this stuff. It's like, how do you not ask him about Shane McMahon?
Yeah,
It just blows my mind. I understand it's a hard job. I understand how it's like going in there, but it's like, just okay. Shane McMahon's shit was in AEW, and he's talking about going to AEW. What do you think of that? Does that hurt you guys? I mean, this is a McMahon going to another company. This has never happened, you know.
No, this is the perfect transition to what I was going to talk about. But Lady B, who we love on this network, she says, "But HHH hasn't read the lawsuit allegedly hot. He can't live that one down, right?
No, but that's another
Literally,
thing. No one's followed up. No one's asked him. No one's came up later and said, "Hey, have you read that lawsuit yet?" At least the worst he can say is no comment. Then guess what? You somebody else can follow up and ask, or he says no comment. But like he said back at Royal Rumble, okay, your father-in-law and your boss just got nailed with a 71-page complaint alleging he did some horrible, horrible things. And he's also under a grand jury indictment for this, or he's getting looked at for an indictment by a grand jury for this. And you say you haven't read the complaint. Why didn't at the next presser didn't somebody ask, have you read it yet? I mean, right now nobody knows since Royal Rumble if he's even looked at it.
So where my mind goes when something like this happens, and I know this because if anything happened in my company that someone thought that there were going to be questions about, they would go, "Hey guys, if anybody reaches out to you and wants to ask you questions about this, here's kind of the process in order that we would like to see, to tell them to contact the press team and blah, 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 like that kind of thing." But you would also probably get a one-pager on, okay, here is what people are going to probably be asking you about this, and this. And here's what your answer should be to this question. So either Triple H isn't involved in any of that stuff, which is kind of silly when he's the guy who hosts the post show press conference.
Yes.
Or he just big timed the whole thing because of what he thinks about the people asking the question, which is I think that's kind of what happened and what continues to happen. But
sorry, my dog's crazy. Hey, dog, get out of the window. Come here. Sorry. I think you're right that he's big timing this. That's my feeling on it, because the thing is even putting him out there without a statement, without something, I think there's also some strategy to this. They're trying to show everybody everything's okay, because Triple H is a possible witness to get called if this goes to an indictment.
Yes.
He's also a possible witness to get called in the Janel Grant suit. He's also possibly involved in some of these crimes if he's tried to help cover them up, if he's tried to help, if he was involved in hushing up any of this. He's a co-conspirator. So I think them putting him out there, I think, is kind of TKO's way of saying, yeah, everything's cool, everything's fine, because we wouldn't be putting Triple H out there if we thought there was a real problem. Well, they have a real problem, and like you said, they have not prepared for this at all in the press. The only thing that saved them is that nobody asked them tough questions, and I think that I think a lot of that comes from the fact that a lot of people don't understand what to ask. It's really hard to ask, And outside of a couple people, it's really difficult to sit down and actually, okay, am I going to spend all this time asking about something that happened 3 months ago, or am I going to ask something that's relevant to the show tonight and that my viewers and people care about more? Because guess what? 65 to 70% of my audience is WWE fans. And if I ask a Janelle Grant question, 70% of them are going to be mad at me.
And I may lose access to being
Yes.
able to do this, which is my content, which is my passion, which is how I make a
Yes.
little bit of money. And this is what I go back to with the majority of the media is podcasters and aggregators.
Yes.
And that is all about talking about the creative art form and some of the backstage news and a lot. But it really is like, do I really want to be a Debbie Downer on this thing that people come to me to discuss because they love it so much? That is the part where
That's the thing. It's like at too. It's like, oh, how dare you guys want to ask questions like this when we're just looking for a little break, man. I go to WWE because I work hard all day and we do all this. Well, don't you want to know something? Don't you want to know what that company's doing to the people that work for it?
not if you want to put your head down and not you don't want it to affect what you enjoy.
Yeah, and to me, that's just the most selfish thing in the world. I don't give a damn what any of those people think. It's like, this is what's happening. This is the reality of it. And if this was happening to you at your workplace, you would call the cops. You would want somebody involved. And the fact that fans feel this way, this explains how they can get away with this kind of thing for so long. They got such a devoted fan base, and a hardcore portion of it is cult like. To be just honest about it, and not all of them, but there's such a devoted portion of them, especially on Twitter and in areas like that. They'll go to the bat for them no matter what. And it's like, why? What's this guy ever done for you?
Exactly.
You wait. He gives you 3 hours of Raw every Monday. I'm not sure. I watched a lot of those Raws. Guess what? I mean, I'd want him. I think he should have went into jail for some of those Raws. But it's
It's
just
funny. Like I will sometimes I will have I will say, put a jersey on. Like that's what you want is you want to
exactly.
wear a jersey for them and you want to be a part of the team. And that's sometimes that's just what a fan is. And I get that. It's kind of like your favorite sports team or whatever. But so why are they so bad at crisis management when they've had to go through so many crises? We can go all the way back to the early 90s with the steroid stuff. One of their own wrestlers wasn't his safety wasn't handled correctly and he died in the ring. Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, those guys were on top of the company in a sense, and one of them died of a heart attack and the other one died because he murdered his family and then committed suicide. They've had so many of these crises. This Vince thing happens, and it's almost like they don't know how to deal with it after all of the trials and tribulations that they've been through. They still have not figured out how to deal with crises happening.
Yeah. Can I pause for 1 second?
Yes.
I got a text message I got to answer because I got a feeling it's family asking.
Yeah, go ahead. So BJ just put pause and he turned off his camera. So he's got secret information that he's got to send to his family. And I am going to put a timestamp on this so I know when to pull this out of the podcast here, out of the audio feed here, which we will put on tonight. By the way, if you have not checked it out, I know Mel and Sam were live earlier today. So they had their show, which has been growing in popularity. So really thank all the people who check in with them. I think they have the single most unique show on the network from their perspectives and the way that they kind of cover wrestling. Lots of indie stuff, lots of, we need to focus on some of these women storylines that their own companies don't even focus on. So check that out if you have not. And then upcoming this week, we have the Dynamite show after AEW Dynamite, which is the first show that they will have since the Olympics started. So kind of imagine Tony's going to try and load this show up to make sure that the numbers are high for them coming out of the Olympics, where they did the two numbers that were really bad, and especially in that 18 to 34 number, which was historically bad. So they'll bounce back, and they are leaning everything into All In. All right, BJ is back. So
I apologize for that. You're really a pro, man. That was great. I can tell you've done real radio. Like, oh wow, that was awesome.
I
I
was
get
like, okay, what am I going to
as
say? Oh,
somebody who works in TV now. I mean, guess what? The weather monitor died, and then you got to vamp for like 5 minutes. That was fantastic. That was artistic. I gotta give that 9 out of 10.
All right. So what we were last talking about was why are they so bad at handling internal crises?
I will tell you this. This is because they've always been able to kayfabe their way out of it.
Mm-hmm.
When they had the wrestler deaths in the 2000s, they went on to HBO Sports, and it was Armin Contain and interviewed him, Vince McMahon, and he simply went into the Vince McMahon character.
Slapped the papers out of his hand, from what I
Yes, he
remember.
did. And they would always rely on the fact that they were the silly wrestling business. No one really paid attention to them. It wasn't a real thing. No one really understood what was going on. If you go back and watch the Donahue show where they were talking about the Ring Boy scandal, there's even people in the audience who are like, "What are you guys talking about with this? This is just silly guys that are really big in tights. What are you talking?" Like, they didn't understand. They couldn't fathom this because they didn't understand that this was an actual business. They viewed it for this certain lens, but that's gone. The children of the 90s who grew up on Monday Night Raw, who grew up on Monday Nitro, are now CEOs of companies, are now running their sports, they're reporters. They're working for the Wall Street Journal. They're working for Sports Illustrated. Richard Deitch, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when he was going head to head with ESPN as the media reporter for Sports Illustrated, what was the background on his Twitter? It was Sting by himself with a ball bat pointing at the whole NWO.
That
Guess
dude
what that was
still
about?
loves wrestling.
Yes. And it's like those people have grown up. They're
Yeah.
familiar with the culture of it. And now they can't get away with the things that they used to be able to get away with. And this is the first for them. Now it's the Wall Street Journal knocking on their door. It's not the New York, it's not just Phil Musnick at the New York
Yeah.
Post.
Yeah.
And this is serious stuff. And they have no idea how to deal with it. That's basically what it comes down to. They just don't know how to do with it. This is new territory for them, and they still haven't adjusted.
How would you now? I will. Let me preface this by saying I refuse to go to any of these pro wrestling press conferences, and the main reason I refuse is because I don't want to be part of the act. And a lot of the times on these things, they're shooting angles. And, I have a friend, John Muse, who was there, and he got hit with Chris Jericho, like hit a water bottle and it knocked him in the face. And, John Muse is just sitting there, and now he's a part of this thing with Chris Jericho. I personally do not want to be involved in that. I know Brian Alvarez has been in the audience minding his own business, and MJF says his name and he's got to interact with him or else he's going to get embarrassed or whatever. So I pull myself out of those moments. When I go to these wrestling shows, I want to go as a fan. I pay for my tickets and all that. And I just don't want to be involved. I'm not interested in, turning my phone on and getting content for my YouTube channel. But that's not to say that that's a bad thing. There are people who do that, and that is why they are there. If you were backstage at one of these Tony Khan or Triple H press conferences, like, how would you handle what some of these other guys have handled? Like the young man from, I believe he was from France, who
Lucas Chakria.
Lucas, yeah, who we
great dude.
interviewed him, and he kind of explained this scenario of him asking the question and kind of being shut down in the way that he was. Like, you've done this for a living, and now you're going into this kind of quasi kayfabe version of what you go to as part of your normal job. Like, how would you handle that situation?
I mean, I have experience going into these situations, politicians or whoever, high school coaches, college coaches, local officials, whatever. And what I would do, and I'll give you one example. It's like the thing that really made me the angriest when I watched any of these press conferences wasn't even WWE, it was AEW. And it's when it was CM Punk's up there doing, the Brawl Out
Yeah.
conference, and Tony Khan's sitting next to him. And I'm like, why doesn't someone stand up and say, Tony, this guy's running down your executive vice presidents and your hottest young star? Do you share this opinion he has of them, or what do you feel about this? He's sitting right there. Why don't you ask the question? I think people feel it's hard because you see these people on TV, and they're also physically imposing when they're in real life, and they're also stars, and they're also known for being smart and talking rough. But you have to kind of go outside yourself and look at it as if, okay, I'm not asking this for me. I'm asking this for my 22,000 followers on TikTok. I'm asking this because a company's hired me to ask this, and it's my job. You got to step outside yourself. Everybody feels self-conscious in these things. The people up there doing the talking feel self-conscious. I can tell you that right now. I mean, I can tell Triple H is nervous when he's up there a lot of the time. That's one reason I don't think he does very well at
He's
certain
got to put on
functions.
his serious glasses though when he
Yeah, he's
does.
got to put on his serious glasses, and, which he probably tells everybody he doesn't really need when they're really trifocals. And oh yeah, well, let's talk about serious business. It was great seeing Stephanie. Didn't she look good? No, I mean, I want somebody to say no, she didn't look good, Hunter. But that's a shot at Hunter, not a shot at Stephanie. But
Stephanie looked very happy and healthy.
I think
She
she's
looked
probably very happy. My guess is
relieved to not have to be doing what Triple H is doing right now.
she probably watches him and thinks, "Thank God, I got either she walked or she got booted." But I bet you she's happy she did. I mean, do that for 20, 30 years, God. And she's another one. It could be a potential witness.
Oh yeah,
she's a potential one. It could be involved in this, and it's like, but it's you go into these things. You gotta okay. I was telling somebody who's a young reporter, and I said, "Are you a Taylor Swift fan?" Yeah. Okay. If Taylor Swift told you to go over there and ask that person a question, would you do it? Well, yeah. Well, then act like Taylor. Okay, pretend you're Taylor Swift. If Taylor Swift wanted to know from Triple H this thing, would she go over and ask him? Yeah, because she's Taylor Swift. If you have to, pretend you're somebody else. Pretend you're doing it for somebody else.
Do you think that these folks have the are quick enough on their feet in the sense of the reason they're asking the question is because they need to get information and possibly some sort of understanding of something that becomes news? Like you're in a sense, I would go to these Strike Force before Strike Force got bought out by the UFC.
Yeah.
I would cover these Strike Force shows, and I would go to the press conferences, and I didn't know what the tenor was at these press conferences. Like you have these like tons of testosterone flowing from these fighters and stuff. And I would get there and I would sit down and Nick Diaz would come out and Nick Diaz would walk out and you would hear applause. And I was like, what is going on? This is really weird. And Nick Diaz would give like these like really like one word uninterested answers. And then he would be done. And then underground MMA with like a lav mic and a small camera would go, "Hey Nick, do you want to do this thing for my website?" And then Nick would fire up and just be like, I'm gonna beat this person up and I'm gonna go smoke out and do like then he's like cutting like a wrestling promo on this guy's camera after the real business that would actually help him, in his actual fight business. He just doesn't say anything and has no interest in it. And what I learned from those is that, okay, I'm not writing for Yahoo Sports, which Dave was at the time, which is I would see Dave work and I was just like, this guy's a maniac. He's how hard he works at these things. Yeah. I would go in there and go, okay, I want to understand.
I want everybody to hear this. If you get a chance to go to a presser event, I would encourage you to do so on a chance that you will see Dave work. I watched Dave work first time at a Perlman Memorial show, and you'll learn 1 year's worth of journalism watching it work. Go ahead.
And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to learn a little bit more about the business side. So, people were asking like, why are they asking this question? What does this mean to the business? What does this mean to what is Scott Coker, the promoter, how he's answering it this way? What is he thinking? And like, I didn't really go there because I didn't have to write on beat. I didn't have a story to publish. Mine was more so the understanding of the business aspect. So that's how I did it. I don't think the pro wrestling folks go to these press conferences to learn more about their craft or to add to the craft or to add to the coverage. They go because they think it's cool for the most part.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I get, it's like almost like getting go to an autograph section or a meet and greet. I think that's how they look at it. They don't know how else to look at it.
And I will say it is probably very cool to be invited on a small list of accepted media to then come to this press conference. But I would pull back and go, okay, why am I here? What did I get invited for? Is it because they don't think I'm going to ask a question? Is it because they think I need to keep this relationship? Like, I don't know how many of the cheese platter folks actually cover these because I'm not that close to it. But I do wonder if they believe they have a role in this thing, which is the reason why I don't go to because I don't want to be a part of the act. And I do wonder if they feel like, well, here's my role. They know they can depend on me to ask this question about this storyline, which is good for their television show.
I think you're right on that. And that's something I haven't really thought of. Is they want to be part of the act. They want to be part of what happens. They want to, they want Roman Reigns to take shots at them or whatever.
Or do they secretly want to be employed at some point by WWE?
I think I honestly think that's the biggest driver of all of it. I think all these people want jobs there. I think all the influencers want to work there. I think the content creators, their goal is to work there. And this is their audition process, is to go there and show that they can be be a WWE product. Well, when you're supposed to be in a press conference, and I mean, I have no desire to ever work for them, and so if I was in there, yeah, I'd be asking hard questions. And if someone wants to, I've interviewed wrestlers before, and they've tried to go kayfabe on me or whatever, and I just blow it off. I mean, but in a situation like that, wrestlers are smart. They're used to staying in front of. I mean, I always would point out these are people that stand in front of 15,000 people and convince them that something's real when they know it isn't.
Yeah.
So it's intimidating, but at the same time, it's like if you go in there, you got a job. You go in there and you are a public face. You are representing a group of people who are either following you online or through your publication or whatever. You have a duty to ask them questions about what's going on with their company, especially when it's dealing with life and death and sex trafficking and sex assault and things like that. Anything anyone else says is an excuse. If you don't ask the hard questions, don't go.
So we have a Lady B wanted me to ask you what you thought about the allowing fans to pay a little money to get invited into the back. Now, these people, I don't think they're given a mic. They're not allowed to, but they do. If you have a small room, they will take up some seats, and maybe that has something to do with, with the shortage of journalists who don't get to go. And we'll talk about that in a second, because that recently happened again. But she said, it's kind of like a Trump presser with supporters in the background cheering and booing reporters, which I think that's a great analogy.
This happens a lot in sporting events too. A lot of college football, especially the press box is loaded with alumni and fans, and then they come down and watch the press conference, and they're clapping behind everybody. And there's either people that work in sports information department. That's not new. It's just annoying it's just someone else you got to walk around. It's like, if you want to go down there and hang out. I mean, I don't understand why a fan would go down there and want to look at questions, watch them answer questions. I mean, it's sweaty, it stinks, you're packed in there. You can't get any food. If you haven't gone to the bathroom before you've gone in there, you're gonna really desperately need to by the time you're gonna get out. I mean, unless you want to meet like Dave or Brian or somebody or Garrett, well, you won't go to them, so they're not going to get to you. But if you want to meet somebody, yeah, I guess. I mean, you want to read a reporter, or you just want to see what happens, or I guess you can go to them. But I mean, to me, it's just that they're trying to think of another way they can just get people to pay for something. But it's I've dealt with this stuff before too. I mean, I had a guy who you know, for some reason he was always assigned to me next to Ohio State games. He brought a transistor radio in. While they got somebody who's announcing over, like we have their own like PA announcer who describes what happens on the play, well, who did it, how many yards it is, so the reporters can get
Yes.
it down. And this guy's got the game on the radio, which is like a 5-minute time lapse. You know, it feels like it's a 5-minute time lapse. It's really like 2 or 3 seconds. It is just like, okay, you're driving me crazy. You know,
I was just at the Giants game, San Francisco Giants game. One of my friends, he is the radio engineer for the Giants, and actually how I met him was because he heard me on Wrestling Observer Radio with Meltzer, so he's also a wrestling fan. So
oh,
then he
cool.
knew I was a Giants fan. He knew I did a Giants podcast, so he reached out to me. We connected, both wrestling and Giants. So I recently got to go to the radio booth to watch John Miller and Dave Fleming,
Wow.
two of the Giants guys, do radio play-by-play. We were there for like 3 innings. And what you said, which is every time something happens, there is someone who is only piped into that room, which somehow does not make the air, like, I don't know, the special microphones or whatever that they use, it does not come over the air. And they, and they give them specific information. It was fun to see, because I've been in radio booths before, but mostly like kind of like before the game or kind of walking around. But
Yeah.
to see those guys, like those real all-star broadcasters do their thing was fascinating. I loved it. I could have just, and the first thing when I told Dave, he's like, "Oh, did you ask John Miller about who did he about Ray Stevens?" And I was like, "Why would I ask John Miller about Ray Stevens?" But I guess John Miller was an Observer reader for a little bit, because he was a
Really?
big, he was a big
Wow.
big Shires guy when he was younger.
Wow. I love John Miller growing up. Well, he was partnered with Joe Morgan in
Yes.
Cincinnati. I'm from Ohio. He was fantastic in the Charlie Hustle documentary. He was one of the
I
few
was gonna ask if you watched that. I watched
I
episode
just
1 the
watched
other
it.
day.
I just watched it last night. I mean, I'm so sick of talking and hearing about Pete Rose. I mean, as a kid, I grew
It
up thinking,
sounds like
oh,
Al Michaels.
there's
It
the.
sounds like Al Michaels is sick and tired of talking about Pete Rose too.
I mean, Al Michaels is just like, oh my God. He is the only thing he gets asked about 2 things, the Miracle on Ice and Pete Rose. And
OJ though, he probably gets asked about
oh
OJ a lot
God,
too.
OJ. Oh God, I forget. Al Michaels is such a legend, but it's that's another thing to bring up. Bob Costas, the one guy who really blew up Vince and got him to quit doing interviews at all, was Bob, and that was because Bob understood the wrestling business, and he'd been to St. Louis, where which was the king territory of all territories for a long time. So it was kind of funny to see Bob smiling and getting the how dare you, oh you got you could tell he got him good. But anyway, but back to John Miller. I thought the Charlie Hustle documentary, I was great to go back. It's like he forgot all these wonderful, amazing things happened with this Reds team, like
Mm-hmm.
just incredible performers, because it's all been overblown. I mean, this was a team people put against the 27 Yankees is the greatest team of all time. Yet nobody remembers any of that because of Pete Rose. And nobody remembers it, like to give another example, it's like Johnny Bench was probably, he was on a Mays Mantle, Ted Williams level of play until he had cancer surgery in 72, 73. They had to like break his ribs and take a bunch of him apart to do that. It's like this guy still is the greatest catcher of all time. And it's like it's just amazing. It's terrible how it's overshadowed everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know John Miller would be an Observer subscriber. That doesn't.
Yeah,
I guess nothing should subscribe me anyway.
yeah. Dave said he was a reader in that, and so I asked my buddy. I was like, here's what Dave said, and he's like, yeah, he told me, he told me one time about something, because they wrestling came up or whatever. So he's like, that kind of checks out. All right, so kind of the last bit on this media, and I want to make sure that I am fair to the podcasters and the aggregators, because I am in that field, right? I am a part of
Yes.
that community, and I understand that everybody's role in what they want to do in wrestling is not the same. What Dave Meltzer does in wrestling is different from what Sean Ross Sapp does in wrestling. They have two completely different jobs. Some of it kind of intersects a little bit, but their jobs are different. Same with Wade Keller. Same with Brian Alvarez. I haven't brought Brian Alvarez up enough. Brian Alvarez is he's I call him kind of like the pioneer of online wrestling conversation content, because he wasn't the first guy to create his own website. I think PW Insiders kind of beat everybody to the punch as far as wrestling podcasts were concerned. But Brian, coming from that IATA and Wrestling Observer Live background, he understood where things were going, and he actually kind of stole PW Insider's lunch money to an extent by doing what he was doing, and then being able to bring Dave over and make this kind of, super site. These guys all do content for different reasons. They cover wrestling differently for different reasons to benefit, in a sense, their career, because they were able to do this as a career. So I am not condemning the podcast community, the aggregator community, for not going up there and asking this question, because if they do not get invited to the next press conference because Triple H didn't like the question that they asked, like there's a person in the chat saying that, these press conferences are just also promotional tools for the podcasters, which I totally get as well. If you may get a little thing when they do the fake SummerSlam recap, and they're like, oh, posted by, SE Scoops, and there's a headline for a story, Roman Reigns is back. Sometimes you do get some of that on WWE TV. So it's good to be in their good graces if you need page views. So I understand all of that. I just wonder, and we'll end with this question. And this is where I think Tony Khan is just as guilty as WWE is when it comes to the reason to have these press conferences. I feel like they want to overall manipulate the media to help push forward their storylines. I think that's the ultimate goal for these press conferences. And again, that's why I don't want to help them get there. I don't want to feel manipulated by them. When Tony Khan is asked a real question and he says, everything is great, relationship is great, we're doing great things. To me, I'm like, if I'm reading between the lines, if everything is great, nothing is great. But
yeah,
people will then
it's the saying, like, if you got two quarterbacks that might start, you really have none.
yeah. So they're they want the content built out of what they're doing, and they know these are the most dedicated people who are going to their shows and covering them, and then they can kind of use them in the promotional wheel. Do you think that a lot of the media understands their role in that, or are they just okay? They're like, hey, yeah, that's fine.
I don't
They
think they
can use
realize it.
me, and I'll use them
I
to
don't
get
think they
my page
realize
views
it.
up.
I don't think they realize it. I think, see, AEW, I think, uses it a lot. I think they do like conversing with media. I think Tony does like talking to media. Um, I think it's also a way for him to do PR that way. I mean, if he doesn't want to answer a question, he's pretty adamant about, but at least he handles a little bit better at WWE. I think WWE, they do push storylines, but I also think they're pushing business. They want to put out here that this is what we're doing. This is what TKO is wanting us to do. This is how we're making money. Their goal is to make money through these things. And they're trying to push things that just push storylines, but they're also pushing product. They're also pushing, other things to try to, as a synergy, as they call it in the corporate world. And to me, it's like, if you're a podcaster and all that, if you're going to shows and there's nothing really of heavy note to do, I don't have problems with the questions that are getting asked. My problem is when they're getting completely ignored and nobody's asking them at all. And it's like you can't depend on one or two people to show up at a press conference to ask the tough questions. So at some point, somebody has to stand up in the room and be a journalist. And right now, if nobody's doing it, if only one person's doing it, or two persons doing it, or two persons, but two people, or if only Brandon Thurston's the only one getting called on to ask, then essentially nobody is. Because it's like at SummerSlam, nobody asked about Shane McMahon, nobody asked about Janelle Grant. Nobody asked about the recent motions in that case. Nobody asked about. I mean, there's a ton of WWE talent that still goes to Peak Wellness, including I think somebody's son-in-law. Uh, it's ridiculous to sit there and say, okay, well, I'm just going to go hide in my content creator corner because I don't want to get kicked out. Well, what are they going to do if you ask? They're going to kick out if all of you ask and all of you want answers. They can't kick all of you out. They're what their decision to do on keeping you there or keeping these going is totally based on something different from your question asking. It's based on what they see as it being relevant, if it's something worth doing. I mean, the thing is, press conferences used to be companies would hold them, or sports teams or politicians. You hold them to get information out. You don't want bad information. You want to be able to say what's going on. You want to inform. You want to tell them what's going on with your company. Normally, a company in the 20 years ago, WWE would, and if this was a real business and not a wrestling business, uh, they would be holding a press conference to say, look, we're aware of the Vince McMahon stuff. We think it's horrible. We're going to investigate it. This is what we're doing. This is who's going to be involved. We're going to put these people on leave. We're going to bring in this team to investigate. Instead, we get none of that.
Yeah.
You get a middle finger flipped at you pretty much, and until people start standing up and asking real questions, it isn't going to change.
All right. So I lied. I do have one more
All right.
part of this that I wanted to ask you about, which is you mentioned Brandon Thurston, and this is sort of related to what Lady B was talking about earlier. The excuse or the reason that Chris LeGentile gave for why they hold certain people out of the press conference, and his answer was that, well, Brandon and John, they do a show together, so we don't need both of them, as long as we have one of them. But there was also a situation, and
I didn't know that. I didn't hear that. Go ahead.
This has been talked about, which is at WrestleMania, they kind of locked people into the luxury suite who were not able to go to the press conference. They didn't really hold them hostage, but I know that they were like, hey, we can't, like, what are we stuck in here for? And one of those people were Mike Johnson, who kind of got frustrated that his name was even mentioned in this whole scenario. But like, what do you think about the idea of, they're kind of picking and choosing, and it's almost like, well, we won't get so much heat if we allow one of these guys, but if we allow three of these guys, we know that the tenor of the press conference is going to change, and thus there will be more questions that we don't want to answer than just this one guy's question.
That's why it's up to people that are in there. If Mike can't get in there and he's locked in a closet or something, then it's up to the people that in the press conference to ask the questions. But too much of it's still going back to fearing they're going to lose access. They're fearing they're going to lose this. They're not going to give you anything if you don't want them to think you're doing a good job. You don't want them to think they like you. I mean, this is like, look at this company's being accused of. Why would you want them to think that they like you? It's not hard. And if you're in there, you at least owe it to your followers to tell them what's going on with reality. I don't care if you're doing you're a content creator based on lucha attire and fashion. You still have to let people know what's going on with this company. And if you don't, you're part of the problem. And we're now to a point where the people know about the Vince McMahon suit. We know people know that there's a grand jury being sat. We do know that this has been an ongoing problem there for years. If you're not asking the questions, you're now part of the problem. And that's the thing, people need to realize. And this is bigger than your content creator career. This is bigger than that. And it comes down to, it's just frustrating.
All right. In the old sports reporter show, they would end the show with what they called a parting shot, which was kind of like a 60-second soliloquy that each of the reporters were able to get, sometimes a little humorous. I'm sure they wrote these out to make sure that they were clever as all hell. I did not write mine out. I'm going to give my parting shot. BJ will give his parting shot, and then we will be out of here. So my parting shot is about Pat McAfee and Logan Paul during the beginning of the Olympics. They both spread misinformation about a female Algerian boxer who, by the way, won the gold medal, named Iman Khalif. Iman Khalif there was some confusion about whether she was able to be in the Olympics or why she was allowed to be in the Olympics, because she was disqualified from a previous tournament. She was allowed to fight in the Olympics. Logan Paul basically called her a transgendered female. And Pat McAfee spread information similarly on his show. Now, I'm fine with both of those guys on their platforms spewing nonsensical things, dude bro conversation about sports, about pop culture, about whatever they want with their opinion. The problem with this conversation is this conversation deals with somebody's real life, somebody who was then bullied throughout the Olympics. And I think there's even a lawsuit out there about how this thing was handled. And so my shout, what I want to tell, if I had Pat and Logan here in front of me, I would say just do a little bit of homework before you give your opinion on something that actually has real world significance. The flip side is, if you don't know, you don't have to say anything. Just be silent until you do know. And I think if they took that advice, that would be for the betterment of situations like this, that they don't get blown out of control because of disinformation. So that is my parting shot. BJ, you have the floor, and we will end this show.
All right. Kevin Sullivan died this week. I'm not sure exactly what the medical circumstances were, but he'd been in ill health for a while. And when you lose a Kevin Sullivan, you're losing one of the greatest minds in the history of the pro wrestling business. I can't speak to some of the things he was accused of in like the Dark Side of the Ring, Chris Benoit episode and things like that. Uh, it sounds like he wasn't always the best husband, but as far as wrestling minds go, and as far as somebody who's a talent and somebody who really influenced the business, go on YouTube, look up Kevin Sullivan, watch his shoot interviews, and just start working your way back through his catalog. If just as a fan or just as somebody who's looking from an educational standpoint, this is a guy who was a white meat baby face, a little bit too short, but came up as a bodybuilder, understood the wrestling business immediately, and somehow managed to get over a satanic Satan worshiper stable in Florida in the early 1980s. It's amazing to me what this guy was able to do and pull off. He was a visionary. He understood the business well before people did. If you someone posted an interview he did with Wade Keller from 1994, where he's talking about the future of the business and the blending of styles and reality, and how the world was becoming smaller. And this was a guy who understood the business decades before things happened. And he is somebody who was a key part of the NWO. If he wasn't involved with Brian Pillman, you never get Brian Pillman, you never get the NWO, and you never get the Attitude Era. We don't get where we're at today without Kevin Sullivan. Whatever has happened with him and Nancy in his life, I hope it didn't happen. I'm not, according to her family, it did. It doesn't say well to him, but I can say as somebody who's as a wrestler, and as somebody who was a booker and a mastermind, he was a great one. And he had some hard things thrown at him too, but he was also, dealing with some really ridiculous allegations during the Chris Benoit investigation and things like that. It was just beyond the pale. Geraldo Rivera, wherever you are, you can go just go dig yourself a hole and lay in it for a while. But Kevin Sullivan is one of the all-time great minds, and he's part of the reason why we're here. So I'm gonna say just get a chance, go on Google, go on YouTube, learn a little bit about Kevin Sullivan and see what this guy was able to do in the 80s and 90s. And it was ridiculous. He was a great mind, and oh man, he was definitely a one and only.
I told this story with Dave on Wrestling Observer Radio the other day, but I'll re-say it here. I met him once, one time. Now, when I was younger and I was buying wrestling magazines, he used to scare the hell out of me because of the satanic gimmick.
Oh yeah, me too.
That you were talking about. And then I got to see him actually wrestle in the late 80s as part of the Varsity Club in the NWA. And obviously, of course, through WCW, and then you learn more about, okay, he's like the booker and all of these things. So fast forward 2015, Wale Mania is happening WrestleMania weekend, and this is in Santa Clara. So this is the Bay Area WrestleMania 31. And Court Bauer is in partnership with Wale hosting this event. Court Bauer's friend, MSL, tells me, hey, do you want to meet Kevin Sullivan? I was like, yeah, that would be really cool. So he walks me over to this other room, and I'm looking around. All I see is this like really tiny, small, gentle human. And I'm like, where's Kevin Sullivan? Where's the Taskmaster? Like, what's going on here? Turns around, and it's Kevin Sullivan. I was like, no, you're the nicest, like most gentle person that I've ever met. This can't be the same guy. Obviously, he was a little bit smaller, a little bit older by then, because he's a short man. He's not a tall man. And I just was like, wow, that's the guy that used to scare the crap out of me in the wrestling magazines when I was 10 years old. So. All right.
That same thing, man. Those black and white pictures, man, they really got that satanic gimmick over. Oh gosh.
All right, BJ, where can people find you on the aforementioned social media site that we both don't like, but we have to be on there?
Well, if you want to send me, if you want to tweet hate stuff at me, you can go to Twitter and look at BJ Bethel tweets at BJ Bethel tweets. I also write for SE Scoops.
All right. This was a lot of fun. I like the angle that we took on some of these stories. So maybe we bring this back every once and again. So we'll have to kind of see what stories are out there that we want to talk about, and then we'll possibly bring it back.
If I get an itch to complain about something, I'll let you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or something that really blows my mind is fun, like Ishii Swerve. Yes.
Is that happening this Wednesday?
Oh, it happened last night, man, on Collision.
Oh, that was last night.
It was on Collision last night.
Okay, so it was a really good match.
It was real. Oh, it's Ishii.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go. I don't usually watch Collision because not a lot of stuff happens, but I may have to go out of my way to watch.
There's some definitely diamonds on Collision that are worth going back and watching. That's for sure. Well, thanks for having me, Garrett. It's been a lot of fun. I've always wanted to talk to you on here, and it's been great.
No, it was awesome. I very much enjoy this aspect of discussion. So, all right, for BJ Bethel, go follow him on Twitter, and maybe he'll tweet more stuff that will get him in trouble with some Twitter fans. But yeah, this was great. We'll bring it back again when the time is right. For BJ, I'm Double G. We will see you when we see you. Peace out.